accessible to all persons with disability. You will note, especially during this COVID context that we are finding ourselves in, the guidance that the Electoral Commission gave is that candidates should have scientific elections, meaning candidates must be perhaps campaigning in TV stations, campaigning in talk shows. I want to give a quick example of a talk show. If it is a radio talk show, a person with a hearing impairment would not participate, and that excludes them. And by far, if you look at the UCC statistics on the access to information, the majority of Ugandans access information through radio. So you have a whole lot of population that is excluded from civic education. And if you are going to have talk shows on TV, most of our TV talk shows in Uganda that delve so deeply and very, I think, instructively discussing political issues that would inform the population do not have provisions for sign language interpreters. Most TV stations only have those sign language interpreters when it is a primetime news. Beyond the primetime news, persons with disabilities have no access to information. And therefore, that becomes a very limiting factor in terms of how they are able to effectively participate in choosing their leaders, in being informed on the processes of voter participation. But also, there are other issues around accessibility.
Yes.
Which is in terms of accessing places of polling stations, for example. Some polling stations are in places that are not accessible, and you find sometimes there have been reports of management of those polling stations where persons with disabilities are then voted for by the polling agents or assistants, and in that regard, the wishes of that particular voter may be thwarted, may be altered, because if someone, say, for example, who has a sight impairment or blind, came to vote, their hands could be put on the vote on the candidate that may not be their choice. And so these present very technical and serious challenges, especially for persons with disabilities who may want to participate in electoral processes. But also, I wanted to add one more challenge, especially now that if we look at the processes that are undertaken in ordinary electoral campaign rallies that do happen, you find that people are walking on the streets chanting, and these days there is the aspect of the violence. Police come at the block and there's a tear gassing, and if someone is with a disability in that kind of situation, they suffer a serious blow. One, you cannot easily run away like anyone else would. Two, and there are challenges with emergency responses in the country generally. If a stray bullet or a tear gas canister fell near a person with disability and they have inhaled that and they need an emergency attention, emergency systems cannot easily be availed to them given our general context as a country. And these present a very fundamental challenge for persons with disabilities to participate effectively in electoral processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Omar, I'm seeing your comments. You're saying probably this COVID pandemic and the resultant SOPs has left many realize that the extent of money in politics. But now, you are touching a number of key findings that are out of experiences. I want to understand, to marry those challenges, whether they are anchored within the gaps within the framework of the law. Because I know for a fact, Uganda ratified to the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, plus all the optional protocols. And that laid the foundation for the legal framework subsequent on how to participate. One of the findings that's in this report by the National Council for Disability that looked at participation of persons with disabilities in the electoral process in Uganda, it looked at how the current electoral laws have failed to kind of like are still blind to the context challenges of the category of persons with disabilities. Is it possible that probably also the law in itself, for example, the provisions that are embedded in the convention itself, like on Article 29, which emphasizes that the persons with disabilities can effectively and fully participate in political and public life on equal basis with others, directly or through freely chosen representatives, including the right and opportunity for them to vote and be elected. They cite that in the enactment of the law, they have not fully or been able to actualize the provisions that enforce the provisions required under the Article 29 of the Convention. Looking at the challenges you've touched, some of them are challenges to do with accessibility of the voting environment, which you talked about, access to, for example, access to the polling stations is still a challenge. In some places, the polling stations are not very, very in proximate areas for the persons with disabilities, for them if they participate, but also the absence of electoral materials in accessible formats, for that matter. And then they also touch the issue of lack of privacy when it comes to the voting process with persons with disabilities. Are there gaps in the law that are kind of like fostering or making us fail to meet the minimum requirements as required by the law?
Thank you, Felix. My take on that very particular question is that the law that we have and the legal framework as we have it is broad enough. The CRPD that we refer to and which Uganda has become a signatory of and ratified the other optional protocols there too, has been signed by various other countries that are perhaps developed and they use the same documents. What is lacking in my humble view is commitment to implementation of some of these provisions which are already existent in the law. Two, it's a question of attitude. To date, I will tell you that around July or so, I participated along with a few others to visit the Electoral Commission to raise concerns around how elections will be conducted in this particular round with the COVID situation and in context of persons with disabilities, because then the question is around social distancing, question is around using electronic or scientific methods. And we did raise to Electoral Commission, we're like, look, you have made these directives, but when you read through these directives, there is nothing pointing out as to how you intend persons with disabilities to effectively participate. And the responses, of course, that came through were like, of course, this is a COVID time. We didn't anticipate this. It came upon us. And we're like, yes, this came upon all of us, not just everybody, not excluding PWDs. It came upon everybody. So in the planning process, there needs to be a thought through context in which you take care and address issues that are pertinent or particular to persons with disabilities. And so the challenges, I think, are still the same. as pointed in that report. And my take is that the law, yes, there could be one or two things that need to be entrenched in the law. For example, the Electoral Commission, when we did a visit, and we proposed in part that we needed a change in how the voting materials are prepared. Can there be a vote of money to prepare specifics in terms of voting material that can be accessible for persons with disability in terms of the format in which they are set out, maybe with the tactile or braille material or something like that, so that persons with disability that need to access that information in that format can be informed. Even basic things like giving monthly or weekly reports from Electoral Commission through TV. There would be no sign language interpreter in most of those very critical dissemination of information. And so these do not, in my view, expressly need a change in law or additional law. I think we suffer from a fatigue of adding law after law to address every small thing. Some of the things can be addressed administratively, and I think through attitude change.
Okay, just quick one before we leave that one. There have been voices that have been expressed that somehow the question of equal representation may be failed to achieve because in the current context, some physical abilities, some physical disabilities, when it comes to the representation, you may find that this possibility of one disability being overrepresented over the other, even when you talk about the complexities around the electoral colleges. For example, yes. How is that true? And how, if that is the case, is it the law that is the gap or is it the enforcement?
Now, I would say that has perhaps two answers: the law and the enforcement question. The law, in the sense that within our law, Felix, the Constitution, for example, if you are someone of unsound mind, you would lose your seat either as a president or as a member of parliament or in any office, an elective office. Now, there are persons with mental disabilities that have been technically excluded from participation in elective politics in that regard. So if you had a history or have a history of some mental illness, and someone quickly can pick that and say, hey, so-and-so had this, they therefore do not qualify to be in such a seat, which in itself is discriminative against such persons. And for a fact, you are not going to find someone in parliament who has had a history or is having a mental disability. So in that regard, the law in itself stands as a very stark challenge. But the other aspect, of course, is the practice. Practice in the sense that you have, when you look at the statistics that was produced by, I think, UBOS, with regard to the various disabilities that are there in Uganda during the National Population Census 2014, you realize from that report that the population of persons with various disabilities varies. And actually, even in that report, the persons with who are with albinism are not listed. It doesn't list little persons, and those are categories of disabilities. And so,
oh, wait a minute. You mean the law falls short on expanding who falls in the brackets of persons with disabilities?
Well, the current law gives that. It recognizes persons with albinism, little persons, and all that. It's recognized in the current law. But what I'm saying is that the census, the UBOS census 2014, in itself did not categorize such persons. So if you look at that report, it follows short in terms of giving the description. How many persons in Uganda have albinism? How many persons in Uganda are little persons? That information is lacking. And in that regard, such persons may not be catered for in terms of a planning process within the country, yet they do exist. And so, yes, there is the element of overrepresentation by a particular category of persons with disability as opposed to another, and that's true. And what has been true is that persons with physical disabilities have, I think, been more showing out in the representation, and perhaps a study to understudy why the other category may not be fully participating needs to be carefully examined. But some of the challenges we did earlier point out would speak to perhaps why that participation is in those varied ways.
Okay, thank you. We are still with Candia Emmanuel. Like I said, is an aspirant for the National Representative of Persons with Disabilities. He's contesting, and he's also an advocate and founding partner at Candia Advocates and Legal Consultants. We are still having the discussion on the impact of monetized politics on Pwds, on ACFIM talks. I want us to briefly go for a break for 2 minutes or less, and then we come back and now make the discussions focus more on nomination fees. I know that's an issue when it comes to how it also partly plays into affecting participation, but also now the elements of financing campaigns within the electoral college, how that affects persons with disabilities, how does it differentiate them. When we come back, we shall have the discussions in that direction. Let's go for a brief break for about a minute or two. Stay tuned. Be back.
COVID-19 lockdown has left us poor. Money from candidates won't make you rich. Do not be desperate. Focus on issues, not money. Often money used in campaigns is dirty money. Do you know its source? Corruption, mafia, drug trafficking, human trafficking, theft from national budget, self-seeking foreigners, selfish businessmen, selfish money lenders. Don't abandon your duty. Elect quality leadership, not big spenders.
Okay, welcome back to our weekly talk show, ACFIM Talks, in studios. For those who are just joining us, we have a guest, Candia Emmanuel, aspirant for National Representative for Persons with Disabilities, an advocate and a partner at Candia Advocates and Legal Consultants, is discussing nothing other than the impact of monetized politics on persons with disabilities. Now, my understanding, I know for a fact that one of the key issues that has been of interest has been the question of nomination fees, especially among interest groups. The youth had issues with that, with the current nomination fees that have been set. Even the women had issues with the nomination fees. And I know if the youth are crying, the women are crying, so must the special interest group of the persons with disabilities also be crying foul over the nomination fees. First of all, what is your take? How is this playing against the very principles the law and the conventions are pushing for of participation and representation? Because I understand, how much are you supposed to pay for nomination?
For parliamentary seat, it's
yes,
just like the others, 3 million.
3 million. That's not little money. And I think for LC5, it's about 1 million.
Yeah.
I think so. It's about 1 million for LC5. So those fees, how are these fees disenfranchising the participation of persons with disabilities?
Thank you, Felix. The question about money, without a doubt, is very critical when it comes to electoral politics. And the nomination fees, as you have indicated, are very critical aspect. My view is that they are quite high. The fact is, and the statistics out there, the majority of persons with disabilities are persons who are the poorest of the poor. If you did your extrapolations of any statistics or demography in Uganda and look out for the poverty indices, persons with disability fall largely within that category of the poor. And therefore, in order for participation to be very effective, especially in political processes at whatever level, the access to such process needs to be in a manner that is not prohibitive for people who may be lacking in terms of resources. And yes, of course, I know there must be a sort of a balance that that must be brought in terms of there being some basic minimum that should be in place, so that people who come into positions of leadership must be able to pay their own bills and not come and feed off the public coffers. There must be that demonstration, in my view, from the start. But then that demonstration shouldn't be a prohibitive process. So when you come to persons with disabilities, I think the nomination fees are quite high. There needs to be a very serious review, not just even for persons with disability alone, for women, for the youth, and various other categories that would make electoral politics more issue-based and more participatory than it is as of now.
Okay. Still on the same, but now slightly venturing into the real aspects of campaign financing, for that matter. I know ACFIM has had a couple of reports, and in their recent study that looked at how campaign spending, how commercialized politics affects the different categories, electoral participants. It projected that come 2020, 2021, one will need a minimum of 500 million Uganda shillings, minimum, to contest for a parliamentary position. In our recent study, which looked at the pre-campaign spending, we had candidates in some of the party politics spending as close to 1 billion Uganda shillings. And we are talking about a constituency. And in this case, you've alluded to that when it comes to the persons with disabilities, you're supposed to, the way you campaign and the cost you incur, all the movements, the people you reach out to are an equivalent of the president. You have to reach out to almost everybody across the country, that constituency. So what are your experiences when it comes to fundraising for resources? Because I understand probably there are unique challenges that come with contesting as a person with disability in fundraising for resources, but also within the college system itself. What are those unique cost centers that push the elections, the contest very high, making it more prohibitive, and gazetting it mainly for people who have money, who have access to resources, for that matter? Then another question that is related to that: what is the role of political parties in this case? How are political parties helping and financing candidates that are participating in special interest groups?
Thank you, Felix. The question of fundraising is a very critical one. The experience is that if you are going to be engaging with delegates across the whole country, you have to fuel a car, unless you have a chopper and are able to run many places in a day. Of course, if it's a chopper, then you know the cost is even much higher. The cost, therefore, into fuel, the cost goes into accommodation, because as you go into these various places, you need to find a place where you can be accommodated. But if you're a person with disability, you may also not just be accommodated anywhere. There are hotels in this country that do not even meet the basic standards of accessibility for persons with disability. And so they may not be conducive for sleeping for certain categories of disabled persons. But beyond that, as you travel, you are going to meet with people who might need sign language interpretation, who might need to access information through other accessible formats like tactile or braille. And all of these will have to go down into your planning and cost budgets in order to be able to reach the electorate effectively. Now, these costs can be heavy. Besides, when you go into the districts to be able to meet with the candidates, rather the delegates, you will find that the delegates do not stay in one place. They will need to move from perhaps their homes, which may be several kilometers away, into a central place where you can be able to interact. And that means, therefore, cost. You need to transport them to the venue. And I was visiting in another district where the chairperson for that district, who I needed to see, had a challenge with his wheelchair. It had been left in some place, and he couldn't therefore move to the central place. Therefore, we had to make arrangement to actually relocate the meeting to his home, and therefore transport the other delegates to come to his home and then convene the meeting at his home. These are very practical challenges that can't be overridden. And so spending in those particular aspects is real. But there are also instances, as you have pointed in your question, where people have also used excessive money. Excessive in the sense that in terms of bribing, these are stories heard where in the past, perhaps even ongoing, where candidates send lots of money to delegate. So these are very practical, real issues, and the focus there for me has been to push on the importance of sticking to the issues and stay put on the issues. Why is this candidature very important? Why must it be trusted? Why must it be voted for? And if that understanding is there, and Felix, I'll tell you from my interactions so far, you find the delegates have understood that money is not making the sense anymore, because they've received it before. The circumstances haven't changed, and there is a need to shift and see clear change in terms of policy positions, in terms of legislative positions that are making sense for the ordinary Ugandan person. And persons with disability are fall more in that category of the ordinary Ugandan. And so the delegates are, I think, becoming more aware and real and pushing for the desire that the issues that affect them are rather addressed than just receiving tokens of money to vote. Whether or not this will bring a very clear change this particular time it will be seen at the voting. Really, we can't say if it's true or not that they will stick to their word. But we are hopeful that the delegates are going to be very objective. They are going to be focusing on the issues and looking at the quality of the persons that are standing to bring their views forward. Political parties, you had a question on political parties providing. I must say, especially in a context like this where a candidate is standing on a platform of a political party, it is important that political parties look towards the funding of these particular candidates. Now, of course, political parties have challenges in terms of raising funds for doing the various activities that they do, and because of that, there have been limitations in as far as what they can provide for the candidates. But if a political party is going to provide support for their candidates, in my view, candidature for a person with disability, I think, may need even much more in terms of support, because one of the area of coverage that the candidate has to engage in, but also two, the aspect of the attendant disabilities that may be inhibitive, that may need particular address, but also thirdly, the other supportive aspects. If a person with disability has to move anywhere, for example, especially with a physical disability or blind, they may need an aid. So when they are moving, it is times two. It's not just one person moving. So those are factors that get into the funding. So political parties I would very much encourage that they seriously support this and review their policy towards election funding processes.
Since you're standing over the FDC ticket, is FDC extending some kind of like party financing, party funding towards your campaign?
They have, in the limited resources available, been able to, as of now, pay for my nomination, which of course is, I think, a huge contribution. Further fundraising is ongoing to try and see if they can commit and provide for these other expenses that required for this whole process.
Yeah, I just out of curiosity, because if ideally, ordinarily, our study put the figure of the minimum requirement one needs, and this one where we are looking at a candidate who is contesting just a constituency, being about 500 million Uganda shillings. So when it comes to a candidate who has to traverse the entire country under a college system, which I also know that it's not a very cheap election, because my understanding that the college systems also have, in fact, too commercialized. I managed to participate in one of the youth, and I could see that there were cases where delegates were being facilitated, and they like using the word facilitating, but it's more bribing, because they transport you, they accommodate you, they feed you, then they give you a khaki envelope to make sure that your vote counts on that day, and the biggest spender of the takes the day, and Somehow people were arguing that probably the college system could be more expensive than we anticipated. So in this case, what are the minimum values, the minimum figures we're talking about here if you are to contest as a candidate for the special interest group for persons with disabilities?
Felix, I've had a very interesting conversation with different participants in this process. Of course, first of all, to do fact finding, to be able to assess if what I'm doing is in the right direction, and to also counter check if what other people are doing is appropriate or not. What I've found to be true is exactly what you say, that there are people who would spend heavily, transport, accommodate, feed, and then dole out some envelopes to the delegates to be able to vote them on the D-Day. But there has also been evidence that somehow there have been people who have sailed through without having to do so much of that. As I did say earlier, it's yet to be seen what the shift in terms of the attitude that we see on the ground is. In the primaries that I think for NRM, I did hear reports of some big spenders having lost already because the delegates have, I think, stood firm to say we are not this time focusing on who spends more. We want quality. So if that's the trajectory, perhaps there will be a change, but yet to be seen. In terms of how much in average one would spend, I want to think that will depend on one's planning. It also depends on one's approach to the whole process, but not less than 100 million, perhaps. If you just did very basic campaign process where you are not paying out anything to excite anybody, but just to facilitate the movements and everything. A minimum of 100 million should be in place to run an effective campaign. But of course, if we look at your report saying 500 million within a constituency, perhaps it's important to also ask what is that money spent on? Because if it's spent on buying out voters, if it's spent on maybe entertainment, spent on so much of that, campaign posters, it could go that far. So perhaps that might need to be asked from I've not read your report, and unfortunately, I'll need to find out, but that question needs to be examined. What is that expenditure on?
Of course, yeah, of course. Yes, they spend on both legitimate and illegitimate costs. Like illegitimate costs, those are costs that are more towards inducing voter choices and decisions.
Yes.
And that's where partly you can place the whole notion of bribery and also doing the work of government of providing social services and anything outside the scope of what a legislator should be doing. Our time is running quick, really it's becoming fast spent. You can join us on this discussion, the conversation going on our social line platforms. We have ACFIM, Facebook, and then at ACFIM Uganda, Twitter, and then you can also join us on our YouTube account to keep the conversation going. My last question, I think second last question, I'm going to combine them into one question because I need to manage the time here. That said, what can we do? What are those practical and feasible solutions we can have put in place to ensure that we address those structural and legalistic challenges that affect effective participation of persons with disabilities in the electoral process? That is one, but also the other rejoinder of that question is that moving into the 2021 elections, how, and this is now beyond just looking at the category or the special interest group of persons with disabilities, but how do we ensure that we have free and fair elections that are not violent, given the scenes we've been having in the past couple of weeks during campaigns?
Thank you, Felix. The first set on what can be done to be able to make election processes more participatory and addressing the challenges that face commercialization of the politics. My view is that there is need for a shift in the law. There needs to be a legal framework in place that critically addresses the question of election financing, and which must be structured through party systems. And two, my take, especially if it's for persons with disabilities, in order to bring down the burden, I do think it's important to make their representation a regional issue, so that the candidate can focus at least within a particular given region and canvass the votes within that set. That will reduce the costs in a very measurable manner. But of course, for that to be done, there needs to be amendments to, especially the persons with disability law, to entrench that very deeply, so that that is addressed. Parties need to be supported. I think from the government, from the public coffers, to be able to run their affairs effectively. And so those would be, I think, offhand, a few things I would say with regard to what can be done. But also, I think awareness creation, where the population needs to be continuously conscientized. Commercialized politics, or those dubious ways in which politics is done, has no a good effect overall for the whole economy and for service delivery for the country. And with regard to the violence, I am a very serious proponent that for free and fair and violence-free election.
Did I lose you? Yes, Emmanuel, did I lose you? You seem to have lost a bit of network here. Emmanuel, are you there? I seem to have lost Emmanuel. Can you hear me? Okay, I seem to have lost Emmanuel, and I was really giving very interesting recommendations to that regard. The legal framework in place that addresses election campaign financing. Yes, that is one of the areas that ACFIM has been consistently and persistently engaging on. And as of early this year, we had this discussion on the floor of Parliament, and there was a unanimity in agreement that we need to have a comprehensive law to address this problem, not to just address it piecemeal in the different electoral laws, but have one law as a proper vehicle to address and legislate on campaign financing. And I think that recommendation ties in well with what ACFIM has been advocating for a long time. But yeah, it talks about the structured financing of political parties, and I know the law, the Political Parties and Organizations Act, provides for financing of political parties on two fronts, by and large on the front of day-to-day, which is on numerical strength, but on the other front of also on equal basis when it comes to financing campaigns of political parties. And as of now, I think today's newspapers of New Vision, the Minister of Finance has come out to say that it's going to finance political parties each with 1 billion Uganda shillings, shared equally. That's 5 billion Uganda shillings shared equally across the 5 political parties that are participating in the electoral process, to be shared equally. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. And it's going to be the first time the Minister of Finance is doing that ever since that law was amended about 8 years back or 5 years back. Now, to that regard also, he also talks about the creating awareness within the population to conscientize and change the way people think and how they act, and they should start voting people based on merit, based on capabilities, based on the manifesto, as opposed to based on money. Yes, Uganda is making steps in that direction. There are small pockets of change that are beginning to show, as he rightly put it. We've seen people lose elections even when they have invested heavily, but we need to see this percentage grow bigger and bigger. Yes, other than that, we were having this conversation, and allow me to bring it to a close. We've been having Emmanuel Candia, who is a participant, is participating in this process as a candidate, but also is a legal practitioner and an advocate, founding partner for Candia Advocates and legal consultants. So we've lost him along the way, but it was good that we had this discussion with him to understand how money affects PWD's participation in electoral processes. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's keep this conversation going. He's back. He's back, and I'm going to give him the last word. We lost you, Emmanuel, but you're back at the point in time when we were running out of time. We have a minute or less to bring this to a close, but I'm going to allow you to have the last word, then we can sign it out.
Thank you, Felix. Sorry for that interruption there. But thank you. It was a very good opportunity to interact. What I ended up saying was that I'm a very big proponent of free and fair electoral processes, and especially a violent-free one, because violence for persons with disability is a no-go zone. And if you bring violence, then we cannot participate. We will be the ultimate victims and suffer the serious blow as persons with disabilities. And so we cannot promote, we cannot hide under and speak for anybody who is for violence. We will be clear: violence must not be in any electoral process. It's only then that we can guarantee a proper and effective participation, especially for persons with disability. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are inspiring shots. Thank you so much, Candia Emmanuel, for joining us, being part of this discussion. We have been discussing nothing other than the impact of monetized politics on PWDs. It's been a pleasure to have you and have this candid discussion. We wish you all the best as you start the hunting for to be elected as the national representative for persons with disabilities come 2021, 2026. We wish you all the best, and allow me to sign it out from here. My name is Felix Kafuma, your host. We'll be with you again, same time, same place, next week on Friday. We shall not be with you, sorry, but we'll come back again. We'll take a break because next Friday will be festive, and then we'll come back on the following Friday, which will be 31st. I think it will be fast for another discussion. As I sign out, I encourage all of you to be responsible, put on your mask, COVID is real, and do social distancing. And yes, wish you all the best. Bye-bye. God bless.
The monster of money politics is eating up Uganda's democracy. When you take money from a candidate, it means you are feeding the monster. Then you become a part of the problem. When a candidate who overspends on campaigns is elected, he or she will not represent voters but himself. He or she will engage in corruption to recover campaign money. Social services will not be delivered and the voter will suffer more. Voter, let's be wise. Give democracy a chance. Do not sell your vote. Focus on the issue.